Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Research Rundown. My name is Courtney Pinkard, and I am the coordinator of the reference room here at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Thank you so much for joining us today on today's Research Rundown. Before we get started, I do want to mention that while I would normally have a colleague of mine here at the archives sort of running things behind the scenes for the stream, it is just me today. So, and it's outside of my wheelhouse, but I have been had about 15 minutes of training. So hopefully we will have some smooth sailing today. But if there are any technical issues, those are mine. And I apologize ahead of time. But I'm new to this, so we're gonna learn together today. So today's topic is going to be researching historic homes or properties at the Department of Archives and History. This is a topic that's of interest to me, and since I've been working at the archives, I've been here about 8 years. I have had several people come into the research room over the years and say, "Hey, I've just recently acquired a historic property and I want to know more about it. Can you help me learn more about it at the archives?" And, we have some resources that we typically recommend for that type of research, like newspapers and city directories. But over the years, I've sort of thought to myself, hey, could we be offering more? Is there, something else that we could be offering to researchers? So I wanted to, for my own information and for yours, I wanted to research, okay, what does go into researching historic property and what resources might we have at the archives to help our researchers? So that's what we're going to discuss today. And I am going to exit stage left so we can see my slides here really well. And we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. All right. So today we're going to discuss the resources that are available at the Alabama Department of Archives and History that could be helpful for researching a historic house or a historic property. And this presentation is going to focus solely on the how-to of conducting historic property research at the archives. So hopefully by the end of today's rundown, you'll come away with a clearer picture on what we have to offer at the archives and maybe get some ideas for where you can go next. When you're just getting started with research on your historic property, I would suggest making a list of research questions. Just like when you're getting started with genealogy research, having some actionable research goals will help guide you to the appropriate sources of information to hopefully answer your question. Think about your research interests. Are you more interested in learning about the structure of the building or structures on the property? Or are you more intrigued to know the story of the people who've lived on the property over time? If both, which is your priority? Some very basic research questions you could start with would be, when was the house built? Or when was the property originally surveyed? How many owners has the property had? Has the property or building ever been anything other than a residence? What other structures may have previously occupied the lot or parcel that you own? You can write these questions down as you think of them. Now that you've got some questions to answer, I want to warn you about a few obstacles that you may encounter along the way. These are common roadblocks for historic property research. First, you need to consider whether your property is urban or rural. Urban properties tend to have more and better documentation than rural properties, and a good many of the record types we're going to discuss today simply will not apply if you're researching a home or property outside of an urban area. Second, it's not uncommon, and honestly, you should probably expect to encounter gaps in the chain of title for your property. We tend to think of land and home ownership as a very structured and well-documented process, but for most of our state's history, that just hasn't been the reality. Thus, the third consideration, you'll most likely encounter missing and scarce documentation, regardless of the age and location of your property. Now that we've set some expectations, let's talk about organizing our research. Charts and spreadsheets can be helpful for tracking and organizing information as you discover it. You might want to consider maybe making like a spreadsheet to record the chain of title from owner to owner, like the top example. You could also have a spreadsheet to record data about the former occupants, similar to what you would create for genealogical research. Creating a timeline of events in the history of the property can be a helpful tool for visualizing the life of the property. In the bottom image, I made a timeline for the Hill House, which is on South Perry Street here in Montgomery. Through newspaper research, I discovered that the house suffered an attic fire in 1924, which caused extensive damage to the roof and second floor, and I included that event in my timeline example. So we've got our list of actionable research questions, we've prepared ourselves for the obstacles, and we've got a plan for organizing our research. Now it's time to dive into what types of records we can find at the archives to aid us in our quest. We're going to talk about researching the property first, and then we'll discuss researching the people associated with the property. There's going to be some overlap, but how we use the records will be different depending on what information we're trying to glean. For researching the property, you can use deeds on microfilm, land patents from the Bureau of Land Management, city directories, fire insurance maps, and photographs and postcards. Some of these resources are available online, and some are only going to be available if you come to do research in the research room in person. So you're probably familiar with deeds, but did you know that there's a document that's created before the first deed is ever filed at the courthouse? These are land patents created by the federal government. The land patent documents the transfer of title from the federal government into the hands of an individual citizen. You can look up land patents for free using the Bureau of Land Management's General Land Office or GLO website, or by subscribing to a paid site called History Geo. You can use History Geo for free while you're in the archives research room. The screenshot on the slide was taken from History Geo. It shows the parcel of land in the city of Montgomery where the governor's mansion and the Hill House would currently stand. The location of the Hill House is denoted by a little star. The legal description of the land where Hill House is located is the southeast quarter of Section 13, Township 16 North, Range 17 East. John W. Freeman patented, that means received title from the federal government, this parcel of land in 1830. Now that we have Freeman's name, we could attempt to find a deed where he sold the land to someone else. County deeds are the vital next step in researching your property. County deed records document the exchange of property from one owner to the next. The deed should contain a legal description of the land in township and range format. I've got should in caps on the slide because we're going to discuss a case later where there wasn't a legal description of the land in the deed. You should start with the most recent owner and work backwards along the chain as far back as you can go. Even if you think you know the name of a previous owner, it's important to start recent and methodically work your way back. There's no way to look up deeds based solely on the description of the land, like the township and range information. So names are going to be key to this type of research. Don't be surprised if you lose track of your property along the way, because the chain of title using deeds is rarely complete or unbroken. If you'd like to look up county deeds at the archives, we have microfilmed copies for all 67 counties in the state. There is a multi-step process for using our deeds on microfilm. First, you need to locate the master index of deeds on microfilm. There are two types of master index, direct and reverse. The image on the slide shows an excerpt from a direct index page, which is organized alphabetically by the seller's, or also called the grantor's, last name. Reverse master indexes are arranged alphabetically by the buyer, also called the grantee's last name. So let's say you're looking for a deed where your ancestor purchased land, but you don't know who they bought it from or when. You could go to the reverse index, find their name as the grantee, and then you'll also have the grantor's name and the date that the sale was recorded. The master index will give you a volume and page number where you can look up the actual text of the deed. In the top line from our example, we see that T.W. Nelson is selling land to G.W. Floyd. We know this is a deed because the instrument column says D. The deed was filed on January 1st, 1876. To see a copy of this deed, we'll have to check Volume 3, page 185. Notice how there's no legal description of the land in this index. So if you only knew the township, range, and section number for your property, but you didn't know to look for the names Nelson or Floyd, you'd never find the deed. Volume 3 is going to be on a separate reel of microfilm from the index. So you'll have a reel of microfilm for the index and a separate reel of microfilm that will show you Volume 3. Once you've located the text of the deed, you'll have to know how to read it. Most deeds follow a basic structure, which we can see in this example. First, the names of the selling party are given, in this case, my fourth great-grandparents, William Mims, and his wife, Louisa. Then the payment amount is given, in this example, $150, which has been paid by the purchasing party, H.A.J. Maddox. And finally, the property is described using the township, range, and section information of the public land system, which is what we have here in Alabama. In this example, the land is described as the south half of the northeast quarter of Section 33 in Township 22, Range 15. It contains 80 acres. Finally, the document is signed by both of the sellers. In theory, you can now go find a deed where Maddox sells this property to another person, and then once you have the name of that person, you can find them selling to someone else, and so on. Moving on to city directories, as the name implies, this source is really only going to be helpful if you're researching a property that's within the limits or immediate vicinity of a large town or city. If your property is rural or outside the city limits, it probably won't be included in the directory. But if your property is in town, you should definitely check out the city directories. City directories are useful for determining when a house or business was built because you can see exactly when the year, you can see the exact year that it would show up in the directory. Directories are handy for seeing changes in street addresses over time, too. The image on the slide is an excerpt from the Montgomery City Directory showing the big street address change that took place here in the city in 1950. Using our example of Hill House, you can see the street address changed from 1104 South Perry Street to 1110 South Perry Street. The directory can also show if the property is being used as a residence, a business, or both. Directories may also contain maps of the city, articles about the city's history, lists of government officials and buildings, and other historical tidbits. Fire insurance maps are one of my favorite resources to share with researchers. These maps, created in the late 1800s and the first half of the 1900s, are like an analog version of Google Maps satellite view. These hand-drawn maps show a top-down view of a town or city, faithfully reproducing the footprint of each building. The color coding on the maps indicates building materials, and each diagram shows how many stories a building has, the placement of windows, doors, and walls, and differentiates between businesses and private homes. Sanborn maps are helpful for finding old street names, street number changes, structures that no longer exist, and to see businesses that were operated previously at a given location. This 1907 Sanborn Fire Insurance map of Selma is a good example of insurance mapping a residential neighborhood. We're going to focus on the two houses pictured. The top image is a house known as the Weaver Castle. It's of brick construction, so its diagram on the map is pink. The house next to it, pictured on the bottom, is a frame house, and so its diagram is yellow on the map. Both houses are 2 stories tall, and you can see the little 2s in the corner of each structure. However, the porches on the front of each house are only on the first floor, so they have little 1s in the corner instead of 2s. Uppercase D in each structure stands for dwelling, and the street number of each house is out in front by the street. In 1907, Weaver Castle was at 526 Lauderdale Street, but today the street number has changed to 625. If you're looking for visual representation of your house or building, you'll probably want to check out our Photographs and Pictures digital collection. To search or browse photos and pictures, you'll need to navigate first to our digital collections, then click the Photographs and Pictures tile, and then you can either search or browse by subject. Here are a couple of examples of images from our collections. The first is a postcard. It shows a street view of the governor's mansion that also includes the Hill House next door. And the bottom is a photograph of the Weaver Castle in Selma. Our digital collections contain thousands of scans of photographs, maps, posters, text items, and so much more. It's always expanding, and we add new digitized materials all the time. So definitely check it out, and check it out frequently. One smaller collection on the digital collections page that I wanted to highlight is the photo vertical file for places. Vertical files are artificial collections that are created by the agency as a catch-all for single items that don't really fit under the umbrella of a larger state government or private collection. We have several types of vertical files, both paper-based and for photographs. The photo vertical file for places contains photos of miscellaneous places around the state, organized first alphabetically by county and then by subject. 895 distinct images from the photo vertical file places have been digitized and uploaded to our digital collections page. Now that we've covered the record types available for researching your house or property, let's discuss the types of records you'll want to consult to learn more about previous owners and possibly residents. Hopefully, you've taken my advice and created a spreadsheet or notes to record the names of individuals associated with your property as you've been exploring the property records. To begin researching the people associated with your property, you can use federal census records, city directories, county histories, probate court records of various kinds, and local newspapers. The census is usually a pretty great place to start for any sort of research about an individual. The federal census is taken every 10 years, and it began in 1790. Starting in 1850, you'll see all members of a household listed by name. Prior to that, only the head of the household is named. Starting in 1870, the relationship of each person to the head of the household is spelled out, which is very helpful. Starting in 1900, the census will show whether the property where the family lives is owned or being rented, which may mean you'll have to search for a potential landlord to figure out who actually owned the property. Census records taken in larger towns and cities may even give the street name and house number. You can get all kinds of valuable information from the census, including names, birth years or age, occupation, education information, citizenship status, homeownership, and military service. Let's look briefly at an example of a page from the 1930 census. In order to make the information from the page easier to read, I've enlarged it and moved some things around. This entry is for the family of Wiley C. Hill Jr. and his wife, Mary B. Each member of the family is listed and their relationship to the head of the household is spelled out. we can see that the Hills own their home, that the home is worth about $50,000, and they also own a radio. Ah, our old friend, the city directory, back again to help us find more information. Previously, we took a look at a screenshot from the Montgomery City Directory that showed the street directory, which is a listing of every household in the city, arranged alphabetically by street and then by house number. On this slide, we see another kind of directory, probably the format that we're more familiar with because it looks like a phone book. If, like me, you're old enough to actually remember those. This is an alphabetical listing of Montgomery inhabitants, organized by last name and then first name. In the older directories, African Americans were usually denoted by a lowercase c or an asterisk by their name, and less commonly, the races were separated completely within the directory with a section for white inhabitants and a section for black inhabitants. Whether black or white, the directory would usually list a home address and occupational information, and sometimes a business address too. In the example, we can see the entry for Mr. Wiley C. Hill Sr., for whom the Hill House was named. His wife, Mary B's name is listed next to his, and he's a partner at the firm of Hill, Whiting, and Thomas and Reeves. His son, Wiley Hill Jr., and his daughter-in-law are the very next entry down. They lived at 1103 South Court Street. Even further down the page, we see an entry for Wiley Sr.'s older brother, William, who's also a partner in the law firm and lives at 1274 South Court Street. Books written by local historians can offer unique insights into the history of a town or county. From these local histories, you might learn about interesting characters and prominent figures from the area, some of whom may have once frequented or even owned your property. You can also learn about significant milestones and events from the county's history, which may have affected the lives of those who used to live or work on your property. The books can be a good source of info about historical landmarks like houses, businesses, churches, schools, roads, and bridges, some of which may no longer even exist. And finally, you may find interesting maps, illustrations, and copies of historical documents referenced or even reproduced in these books. You'll find many local histories on the ready reference bookshelves in the ADAH research room. Probate court records were kept by each county, and they are a goldmine of information about individuals. The archives has microfilmed copies of probate court records for all 67 counties in the state. As we've previously discussed, the probate court records deeds, but it also has responsibility for keeping records like marriage licenses, wills, minutes of each court session, and all types of documents related to a deceased person's estate. Probate court records may also be one of the very few sources of personal information about enslaved people who often weren't recorded at all unless they were documented as part of their enslaver's estate. Probate court records can reveal so much about the lives of previous property owners. This image, an excerpt from a Chilton County will book, shows the will of W.E. Johnston, which was written in 1888. Johnston leaves all of his real and personal property to his niece, Mary Brushwood. He also makes her the executrix of his estate. Johnston was an attorney by trade and was also appointed postmaster of Briarfield, Alabama, where his brother-in-law ran the iron works. At the time of his death, at just 40 years old, he was unmarried and had no children, hence why Miss Mary Brushwood was his sole heir. Finally, we're going to cover one of the last potential treasure troves of information about people and property, the local newspaper. The archives has historical newspapers in 3 formats: print, microfilm, and digitized to a website called newspapers.com. When it comes to researching people, newspapers often document both momentous milestones and the mundane day-to-day happenings of life. You might find birth announcements, obituaries, engagement and marriage announcements, articles about military service, retirement from a job, who made the A honor roll at school, or who robbed the First National Bank. Likewise, newspapers can record interesting events at a particular location. You might find that your home or business was the site of a party, wedding, or civic meeting, or possibly the location of a notorious crime, a fire, or some other disaster. This headline is from 1924 and mentions the serious fire that broke out at the Hill House in November of that year. About a month later, the Montgomery Advertiser reports that the owner, Wiley Hill, filed for a $7,000 building permit to repair the damage from the fire. That would be roughly $132,000 in 2025 money. Besides the Alabama Archives, there are many other repositories that you can check to gather additional information about your property. The Alabama Historical Commission is the state agency that is tasked with historic preservation work within the state, and they have a great website with tons of documentation, including an interactive map that shows location and details of historic houses, churches, schools, bridges, cemeteries, commercial buildings, farms, and more that have been surveyed by the commission. Their site has great info about how you can nominate your historic property to the Alabama Register of Landmarks and Heritage, apply for a historical marker, and survey a historic cemetery. A similar national program to the state-level register would be the National Register of Historic Places, which is administered by the National Park Service. And I always encourage researchers to tap into their local resources like public libraries, municipal or county archives, local museums, and historical or genealogical societies that operate in the municipality or county where your property is located. All right, so that is going to conclude our program for today. I did want to remind everyone that the research room at the archives is open Tuesday through Saturday, 8:30 to 4:30. If you want to come in and test out some of the skills that we've learned today and do some historical property research, you can visit us any day of the week besides Sunday and Monday, where the research room is always closed to the public on Mondays. And you also have my contact information here if you have any questions about doing this type of research and you'd like to reach out. So very quickly, I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen. Okay, and here I am. Hello, everybody. All right, so let's see if we've got some questions. All right, so Chris Gregory over on YouTube asks, does the property have to be deemed as historical or if it is just very old? So these types of resources can apply to, if your property, like let's say your house was constructed more recently. I think, and I could be wrong, but I think in order to be considered a historical property for the historical commission's purposes of like adding it to their register, I think it has to be at least 75 years old. But again, I don't know that for certain. That's just a number that's stuck in my head. So, I guess that's sort of their definition of what historical would be. But I mean, if you've recently acquired a house and the house is just, let's say 25 or 50 years old, you can still use a lot of these same resources to do research on the property and find out more about who's owned it previously. Has there been other structures on the property? Now, of course, if you're going to use stuff like Sanborn maps, the most recent Sanborn maps were created in the 1940s. So if you've got a property that's built in like the 70s, that's not really going to be a resource that's going to help you with that. But you can still do a little bit of this type of research for a more recent property. All right. So let's see if we have any more questions. Martha says that this has been a good overview for research. Thank you, Martha. That's what I was shooting for. All right. So if we don't have any more questions from the audience, I think we're going to wrap it up for the day. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. And I did want to note that these research rundowns are recorded and they get posted to the Archives official YouTube channel. So if you want to review the information that we've covered today or share this information with someone else, in the next couple days, the video will get posted to YouTube, and then you can share it with others or go back and review the information later. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.